Every Tuesday at 8:35, we get a chance to talk to Albert Breer from SI.com, a Monday morning quarterback. He joins us in the CarX Tire and Auto Hotline.
Rattle, rattle, thunder, clatter, boom, boom, boom. Don't worry, call the CarX man.
Cap is off today. It's Jay Hood here on the Cap and Jay Hood Morning Show. So glad you're with us here as we talk to Albert Breer. Good morning, Albert.
Good morning, Hoodie. How we doing?
Doing very well, thank you. I want to ask you about the ebb and flow of what it took for the Jets to get Aaron Rodgers. You wrote about it on SI.com. I mean, what's the old expression? Once you're a Jet all the way. Like, there's such a dumpster fire of an organization over the years, but seemingly they did what they need to do to get their quarterback. What was that process like?
Bumpy, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I think, one of the things I want to emphasize in the piece was that I do think, the relationships, the people on hand helped. I think the fact that, Joe Douglas and Brian Gutekunst have such a good relationship from having been on the road and could trust each other helped. I think the coaches sort of, having that pact to stay out of it and the fact that they were best friends to begin with, that helped. And then I think there was another, part of it, where, I think Woody Johnson and Mark Murphy were sort of marked by the experience of going through the Brett Favre trade 15 years ago, and so, I think this is always going to be complicated because optics are going to be involved with a trade like this, And so for the team that's offloading the quarterback, you don't want to make it seem like you got hoodwinked or you walked away from a guy like that for anything less than full market value. And then I think for the team bringing in the quarterback, you've got to protect your long-term interest because the guy might only be there for a year or two. And when you're, and I know people have a hard time conceptualizing this, Hoodie, but a first round pick, let's say a guy becomes a Pro Bowl player. Well, now you have the Pro Bowl player under cost control for 5 years. So that's what you're trading, right? Versus, bringing in a guy for a year at probably twice as much as it would cost for the entire contract of that rookie that you're trading away, So there's a complicated deal to do because there aren't great precedents for it. There's a complicated deal to do because of the history both teams had from the Favre thing. And I think eventually it winds up getting pushed over the goal line because of the relationships that existed between the people who were in charge of the two teams.
Well, aren't you surprised that the Jets were able to finally get this done? I mean, their history.
Yeah, I know their history, but they had to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Here's the reality of it. And I think Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh have done a good job on a few different fronts. But the fact of the matter is, this is a lifeline for them. You know what I mean? How many GMs and coaches survive drafting a quarterback second overall and seeing him go down in flames in 2 years? You know what I mean? There aren't many that'll survive. Sort of what Zach Wilson has been would survive what Zach Wilson has been in the last 2 years. And so, what this provides for them is an opportunity to show everybody, well, we may have messed that up, but we did good work everywhere else. And the roster's in really good shape. And here's proof, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time wants to play for us. And, I think, failing to get this done would only highlight the mistake that they made with Wilson and probably be the death nail for, the GM and head coach in New York. So as far as urgency goes, I don't think the guys in charge of the Jets had any choice but to get it done. And on the Packers side, look, I think they had leverage because they knew the Jets were in that position. But for them, too, if Rodgers retires, they walk away, they don't get anything, Mm-hmm. So to get this sort of return where you get a second-round pick, and I think that pick became Luke Musgrave, right, the tight end from Oregon State. And then almost certainly, unless Rodgers has some sort of, very serious injury, they're going to get a first-round pick next year. It's a much better return than what they got for Brett Favre all those years ago.
I want to ask you about Andrew Luck. We've heard of players retiring early and for whatever reason. But with Andrew Luck, I remember that exhibition game against the Bears, and all of a sudden he just bounced on the Colts. And so, is the story true that the Washington football team was interested in Andrew Luck's services?
So what I was told, I think this story's sort of been out there, and it's interesting how this thing spiraled over the last 2 days. But When Washington was looking last year, and they made, if you remember, they took a pretty big swing at Matthew Stafford.
Mm-hmm.
They offered, I'm trying to remember, I think it was a first and a third round pick, and in last year's draft to get him. And Stafford didn't want to go there. Like the Panthers and the Commanders both made really good offers for Matthew Stafford, and he didn't want to go to either of those places. So that was 2 years ago. When this was happening. Or was it last year? 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
They went through that, and then, they come back the next year, and they had basically decided we're going to turn over every rock to try to find a starting quarterback. And then eventually they landed on Carson Wentz, which obviously wasn't the right answer. But, they took this approach, it can't hurt to ask approach. So, that meant, calling every team about this idea, that idea. And I guess it's the sort of there's no stupid question. Will you trade me Justin Herbert? Might seem like a stupid question, but, I guess they took the approach it can't hurt to ask. And Andrew Luck was one of those things that they sort of wanted to investigate as part of this really, really broad look at which quarterbacks might be available for whatever the price might be.
That should be a white whale for you, right? Can't you just find Andrew Luck and ask him why? I haven't heard anything from him since he walked away.
Yeah, well, Seth Wickersham, who's does a great job with all this stuff. Did a really really good story with him for ESPN, and I had actually reached out to him a couple times, and he's always really really nice. Andrew's one of the best people I've covered. In 18 years covering the NFL. One of the best people I've covered. And he was just very reserved and didn't want to make a big deal of his existence, I guess, and I think part of it for him was he just sort of wanted to be a regular dude. You know what I mean? And I think he liked the idea. I mean, I think that's part of the reason, Huddy, why he went to Stanford in the first place. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If Andrew Luck goes to Ohio State or Alabama or he can't walk across campus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At Stanford, he could ride his bike across campus and no one's going to bother him, And, I just think that there was that part of it that, part of, walking away from football that appealed to him. And I think that part of it he really likes, just being able to be a regular, normal dude. And I think, the idea of bringing more attention to himself was always something that I don't think he was wild about doing. Now, eventually he did do the story, and he did it with Seth, and Seth did a fantastic job with it. But I know it took some prodding for that to happen. And yeah, I just think a huge part of it is the contentment he's found away from football.
You got any rumor or innuendo about the schedule coming up on Thursday? Some rumors, some hotness?
I'll tell you what's not a rumor. What's not a rumor is that I'm pissed off that they're going to have a triple header on Christmas Day again. And
yeah, man,
that's a fact.
Gosh,
yeah. I you hear little things about what they're going to do with Germany and everything else. So that should be good, the back-to-back games in Germany. And, I think I think, one thing that I have my eyes on, and I don't pay a ton of attention to this. I like the, digging into the process of how it happens and all of that. But I don't pay a ton of attention to the schedule release because we have answers on who teams are playing 3-4 months before that. I always think who they place in the opening game is interesting. And, I kind of dug through that last night. And, I talked to somebody with the Chiefs who thought it was going to be the Chargers. And then I looked it up, and I was like, oh, well, wait a second. There's only been one division game in the last 10 of these, and it was actually that Bears-Packers game that was, just to commemorate the 100th anniversary. So you think maybe it's not a division game. I can't imagine they'd put, the Eagles or Bills or Bengals. The Bengals maybe, but, the Eagles or Bills, you can't imagine they put, that sort of marquee matchup on this opening Thursday because they probably want to use that for late ratings later in the year. Mm-hmm. So, I sort of came up with the Dolphins or Lions as fun alternatives. But that's always interesting because it sort of tells you what the league thinks about these teams. And the Dolphins would be interesting, although they might want to avoid the Tua storyline. The Lions, I think, to me, the Lions are a lot of fun, but I don't know if they have the national appeal. And the Bengals, again, the Bengals, you might look at it and say, if you're the league, well, they're not a ratings, driver the way some of the other great teams are. and we could put a really relevant game on that first Thursday night. But there are a lot of good options there for the league, no question about it.
It's a longer conversation, Albert, but it's just like nothing stops the NFL. This big snowball. I mean, they don't care about the NBA. Adam Silver's got to be pissed off. It's like, well, this is our day, Christmas Day, and you're putting 3 games there. And then our mediocre college football games would get like the day
Black
after
Friday,
Thanksgiving. Yeah, on Black Friday. We're not even getting that too.
Remember, Hoodie, do you remember as a kid? I believe Colorado, Nebraska was always in that day.
Yes.
Right. And that was when it was a big game when we were kids, right?
Yes.
That was like when Bill McCartney was at Colorado and Tom Osborne was at Nebraska, and those were massive games. And so that's sort of like always been part of my thing is like Black Friday, I'll be sitting in my office doing work or whatever, you'll just have the Iowa game on in the background,
right?
So
they're taking that away from us too.
I know, and Thursday they're making a big day. I will tell you I won't be watching the schedule release because Thursday's my wife's birthday.
Oh,
so
okay.
I won't be. I will not be. I will not be sitting on the couch watching it. But I have a great story if you want to hear it from
please.
Chicago, actually.
Yeah.
So the league uses the network to promote these sorts of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the network sort of becomes like a promotional tool for the league to, if they want to turn an event or a date into a bigger thing, then they'll use the network to do it. So we were part of that when I was the network. It was probably 10 years ago. And so they sent me to Chicago for the schedule release. And they're like, it'll be great. You'll be at a bar. There'll be people reacting and everything else. And, there'll be Bears fans there. And you'll be able to kind of play to the crowd and all of that, like layup, right?
Yeah.
So what they didn't realize was that both the Blackhawks and Bulls had playoff games that night. And so I get sent to Chicago, and I get put in this sports bar in the suburbs, which, I mean, fine, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what sports bar in Chicago on the night the Bulls and Blackhawks are playing playoff games is going to have the schedule release up on one of the TVs? So we literally had to go to the bartender and tell him and ask him, because obviously we were giving the bar publicity too. We had to go to the bar. I had to go to the bartender and ask him hey, can you please put the schedule release up on one of these TVs so I have it in the background? And I may have actually gotten in trouble too for referencing the fact that I had to do that on the air. But, I think we passed the statute of limitations on me getting in trouble for telling the story.
Yeah, out of 3 events, that's like 4th or 5th. Like the schedule release in that bar at that time. We loved having you on, man. Thanks so much as always.
And hey, congratulations to Chicago. Big day for the Blackhawks yesterday.
Number 1, brother. We're back.
How about that? Yeah, and it's the right year. I mean, I'm not the biggest hockey guy, but it seems like it's the right year to have the first pick too.
Oh, absolutely. You're trying to reset the organization. Totally understand it. Albert, as always, we appreciate you coming on.